"We only kept you for the money," my mom said with a smile. So I left that night and let them wake up to a frozen bank account. She said it so casually, so effortlessly, like it was the most normal thing in the world. No bitterness laced her voice, no hidden spite, no drunken slur or misplaced fury to blame it on, just a polished smirk on her face and a tone that mocked sincerity. "We only kept you for the money." I didn't speak. I didn't blink. I didn't even breathe for a moment. My mother, the woman who once cried in front of social workers saying she'd do anything to keep me, was now sipping her tea and laughing like I was part of some long con that finally outlived its usefulness. The others, my father, if I could call him that, and my younger brother, who had spent more time in my spare bedroom than his own apartment, sat silently. Not shocked, not offended, just silent. That told me everything. The years of sacrifice suddenly made perfect sense. How they always needed help, just this once. How every family emergency curiously aligned with my paychecks. The way my name ended up on everything that mattered, because I had the credit, I had the income, and they had the gall. When I got promoted, they celebrated like they'd won the lottery. When I bought the house, they moved in like it had always belonged to them. Every dinner, every chore, every sleepless night listening to their problems instead of focusing on my own life. None of it had been for love. It had been a subscription they never paid for, but enjoyed like they were entitled to it. And now, with a single sentence, the illusion shattered. I didn't make a scene. That would have been a performance they could twist against me later. I didn't cry, because there was no grief left to give people who had turned my existence into an investment. I stood up, calm and quiet, as if I were simply excusing myself from a boring conversation. I nodded once, not to them, but to myself, a quiet affirmation that I had heard enough, that I finally understood, and that understanding was all I needed to act. I walked down the hall, straight to my room, the only space in the house untouched by their hands. It was organized, minimalist, a sanctuary carved out of chaos. I grabbed the bag I always kept under my bed for business trips, not because I was planning to leave, but because when you live around people who feed on you, you learn to be ready. Clothes went in with silent precision. I didn't bother with the framed photos. I didn't want to take memories built on lies. I packed my laptop, chargers, passport, the encrypted USBs holding backups of everything I ever worked on. Every financial account, business asset, digital lock, linked to my fingertips. They had no idea how much power they'd handed me simply because I'd been useful. Downstairs they were still laughing. She had moved on to another story, some recycled anecdote designed to make her look clever and well-meaning. My father gave one of those half-hearted chuckles he was known for, like he was tired but couldn't afford to stop pretending. My brother, half checked out on his phone, didn't even glance up. None of them noticed me walking past them with the bag over my shoulder. I didn't say goodbye. The night was cold, but still. I could feel the weight of the silence in the air as I stepped outside and closed the front door behind me. It didn't creak or slam. It simply clicked shut. Final. Decisive. The driveway was empty. Of course it was. They never paid for their own cars. I walked to the corner where I'd parked mine earlier, just in case. I had a feeling. Not a premonition, but a sharpened instinct built from years of learning when I was about to be used. I slid into the driver's seat and pulled away without looking back. The hotel was already booked. I used a new card, one they didn't know existed. Everything was under a pseudonym I'd registered months ago. Again, just in case. The room was clean, impersonal, and quiet. It was perfect. I sat down at the small desk by the window and opened my laptop. First, I logged into the main joint account, the one they dipped into for groceries, subscriptions, their takeout addiction, the weekend getaways they pretended were surprises. I removed them as authorized users. The system sent them emails, cold, automated notifications they'd wake up to with puzzled faces and empty wallets, then the utilities, electricity, gas, water, internet, all under my name, all scheduled for cancellation at 8 a.m. sharp. Just enough time for the morning coffee to start brewing before the power cut out. The house would turn on them with the same casual betrayal they'd shown me. I didn't laugh. It wasn't funny. Next, I called the bank, verified every security question, froze the lines of credit that they thought were still open. Flagged suspicious activity from my end. Yes, the charges they made last night for that family dinner counted. Fraud investigation launched. Access denied. Then the house. Paid in full. Deeded to me. They never noticed I never put their names on it. Never asked why the mortgage never came. They were too used to things magically working out. I sent a notice to my lawyer. Pre-written. Just needed to be dated and signed. The eviction clause was clear. Unauthorized residents could be removed within 72 hours. And finally, the insurance. I adjusted the beneficiary details. Removed every single one of them. Left it blank. If something happened to me, the money would vanish into the system with no name to claim it. They wouldn't get another dime. By the time the sun hinted at rising through the blinds, I was done. I leaned back in the chair, stared at the blank ceiling, and exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding for years. This wasn't revenge. It wasn't rage. It was subtraction. The removal of a tumor I'd lived with so long I forgot what peace felt like without its pressure on my chest. They wanted the money? They built their lives around it? Around me? Fine. Let them feel the absence. Let them scramble when the fridge shuts off, when the landlord's lock appears on the door they thought they owned, when their credit cards get declined mid-purchase. Let them call the numbers and get redirected to hold music they can't talk their way past. Let them understand that the foundation they stood on was never theirs. My phone buzzed at 6:21 a.m. Mom, bank's down? Did you change something? I didn't answer. 6:23 a.m. Your dad's card isn't working. 6:24 a.m. You there? 6:25 a.m. Hello? I put the phone face down. The silence felt like the first real sound I'd heard in years. I ordered room service, eggs, toast. No coffee. I'd been off caffeine since last October when the anxiety started flaring up from all their stress. By the time I finished eating, the messages had become more frantic. Calls from my brother. Voicemails. All ignored. The final one, from Mom again, was simple. 7:08 a.m. What did you do? What I did. I lived. Finally. Away from them. Away from the burden of being their fixer, their ATM, their emotional landfill. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened a new document on my screen, labeled it Phase 2, because I wasn't just walking away. I was going to build something that had never belonged to them. Not just a new life, a new identity, one born from the ashes of their lies. They could keep the house, for now. Let it rot in their hands. Let them pay for the things they thought would always be mine to handle. Me? I was already gone. By the time the second morning arrived, their panic had grown from quiet confusion into a full-blown meltdown. I knew it, not from anything they said directly, but from the string of calls, texts, voicemails, and emails flooding every channel they remembered. Most of them came from my mother, which made sense. She was always the face of the operation. My father preferred the background, his hands never dirty but always close to the cash. And my brother? He relied on everyone else to clean up whatever mess he stepped in. The first email read, "Your accounts are glitched or something. Can you fix it today?" The second, just an hour later, "Your dad needs gas money." The station wouldn't take his card. Then, "We're going to the bank to sort this out. If it's a fraud issue, just tell them it was a mistake." That one made me pause. It was the subtle way she wrote mistake, like I owed them an apology for not explaining myself before shutting the tab. But there was no mistake. I had only given them too much time and too many chances. They'd spent years getting away with it, acting like their dependency was a form of love, and now the absence of that illusion was choking them. I didn't reply to anything. Instead, I moved forward. First, I rerouted my personal banking to a separate institution, one they had no ties to. The old one was scorched now, flagged for suspicious usage. I'd let it collapse. I didn't need to salvage anything from that chapter. My finances were safe, reorganized, protected by authentication methods they'd never guess. No birthdays, no names, no codes linked to the family. The new account was funded with savings, investments I'd moved in silence over the past year, and a crypto reserve they didn't know existed. It wasn't about hiding wealth. It was about building distance they couldn't cross. Then came the real work. Everything I'd put on hold for them had to be dealt with. The graduate program I deferred twice because Mom needed surgery and Dad couldn't take off work, even though he hadn't been employed in 4 years. The business idea I shelved when my brother's gambling spiraled and they begged me to bail him out. The condo I never moved into because they guilted me into letting them stay in the house, claiming they'd only need a few months to get back on their feet. It was time to reclaim what I'd postponed. I contacted the university. My application was still valid, my deferment extended, and with one confirmation call, my enrollment was active for the summer term. I chose the online option. I didn't want to tie myself to one place just yet. Next, I called the real estate agent who had handled my condo purchase. Yes, the one I paid off but never lived in. The unit had been sitting vacant, rented out a few times through short-term leases, but it was available again. I gave instructions to clean it, restock it, and change the locks. I'd arrive in 2 days. It would be mine again. That evening, my father tried calling. Once. He didn't leave a message. He never did like confrontation, especially when he wasn't in control. I imagined him sitting in the kitchen, eyes narrowed at his phone, pretending he wasn't worried. He probably told himself this was temporary, that I'd calm down, apologize, and restore everything, that I was still the dutiful child too afraid to burn bridges. But I didn't leave smoke behind. I took the bridge with me. Later that night, my brother sent a message. "You're being petty. You could have just talked to us." No, I couldn't. Talking never changed anything. Words only mattered when they wanted something. Apologies were temporary and promises were empty. Every time I tried to express frustration, they'd redirect the conversation until I was the one apologizing. Every attempt to set boundaries ended with guilt-tripping or silent treatment. They didn't want dialogue. They wanted obedience. I powered off the phone again. The second hotel was less sterile than the first. The staff didn't ask questions, and the room had a small balcony overlooking a dimly lit courtyard. I didn't plan to stay long. It was a transitional space. Still, I sat out there that night with a bottle of water and no noise but the occasional engine revving in the distance. I wasn't sad. I wasn't angry. I was watching myself unfold. Slowly, methodically. At 9:42 p.m., a private number called. It rang 6 times before going to voicemail. Then it rang again. 6 more, then silence. I stared at the phone for another hour. No more calls, no threats, no declarations of love. Just digital quiet. That night, I logged into the security system of the house, my house, and reviewed the footage. The cameras I installed 2 years ago were still active, still linked to my email, still untouched. I had placed them in neutral zones: front porch, back door, kitchen, hallway. Nothing intrusive. Just enough to monitor entry points. Back then, I justified it to myself as safety. But now I saw it as evidence of who really lived there, of what they did when they thought I wasn't watching. The kitchen camera picked up most of it. My mother was pacing, phone in hand, complaining loudly. My father sat at the table, saying nothing. My brother was gone, probably out with friends trying to borrow money, or at a bar, lying about being in temporary trouble. The footage showed confusion, irritation, but not remorse. I kept watching. Around midnight, my mother opened the fridge, pulled out a half-eaten cake from the previous week's celebration, my promotion, the one I paid for, the one they said was our victory as a family. She scooped a piece onto a plate, sat down, and turned on the TV like nothing had happened. That told me everything again. They weren't afraid I was gone. They were angry I'd taken what they thought was theirs. They didn't miss me. They missed the money. The following day, I checked in on the eviction process. Legally, I had every right. They were not tenants. No lease, no rent, nothing to protect them. It would take time, maybe a few court filings if they contested it, but the process had begun. I had evidence of ownership, statements of unpaid obligations, records of every transfer made in their name. My lawyer, a quiet man with a background in family disputes, didn't ask questions, just filed the paperwork and sent me updates. Meanwhile, the utilities had fully disconnected. No lights, no water, no heat. The house sat in silence, a shell of what it was. I imagined them arguing, searching for someone to blame, and circling back to the same conclusion: me. But they didn't know me anymore. I wasn't the child who bent to keep the peace. I wasn't the provider who asked for nothing. I wasn't the convenience they molded into a currency. The next part was more difficult, not emotionally, just logistically. I canceled the storage unit that held boxes of their things: childhood photos, unused furniture, items they claimed had sentimental value but never visited. I arranged for it all to be sent to their new mailing address, my brother's girlfriend's apartment. If they refused the delivery, it would go to auction. I didn't care either way. I kept nothing, not even the Christmas ornaments. By the end of that week, everything was cut. Their phones stopped working, their subscriptions canceled, their insurance lapsed. The accounts under my name were erased from existence. Their access to me, financial, digital, physical, was dissolved. And still, they called. Fewer messages now, less fury, more desperation. My mother's latest voicemail sounded different. "We didn't mean it like that. It was a joke. You know how I am." Yes, I did know. She always laughed after the damage was done, as if mockery could erase malice, as if belittling me softened the truth. But there was no joke in her eyes that night, no sarcasm in her tone, just the smooth, satisfied cruelty of someone who had taken too much for too long. So I didn't respond. Instead, I started rebuilding. I created a new name for my LLC, something clean, detached from anything they'd remember. I moved the business assets into that shell and set up 2 virtual offices, one in another state, one overseas. I wasn't running. I was expanding. My network didn't need to know the details. Most people had no idea what I dealt with at home. I had always been composed, always presentable. I did my work, met my deadlines, kept my emotions off the table. So when I disappeared for a week, nobody questioned it. When I reappeared with new branding and a sharper vision, they celebrated the evolution. To the outside world, I was just leveling up. Only I knew I had shed an entire life to get there. One night, after finalizing the condo lease and uploading my enrollment confirmation, I opened the last voicemail again. "Mom, you'll regret this when we're gone. We're still your family." That word, family, used like a leash, worn like a badge, dropped like a weapon. But I didn't regret anything. Because family doesn't hold you hostage. Family doesn't measure love in dollars. Family doesn't laugh while telling you that your existence was a financial decision. I deleted the voicemail, not in anger, not in triumph, just because it was time. There was nothing left to hear. The eviction notice was served in person. A process server showed up just after noon, handed them the envelope, and walked away without offering any explanation. I saw it unfold through the security camera still watching the porch. My mother opened the door in a robe, her face puffed from whatever pills she was now taking to calm her nerves. My father appeared behind her, squinting at the document like it was written in a foreign language. There was no reaction from my brother. He'd already vanished by then, likely staying with someone willing to ignore his trail of IOUs. They didn't scream. They didn't cry. They just stood there for several minutes before closing the door, and in that moment, something shifted. I knew it wasn't over. Not because they had any real power left, but because people like them don't stop until the last thread is cut. They thought they still had some leverage. They didn't. By the time they realized the house wasn't just mine on paper, but also mine legally, financially, and entirely, the deadline was already counting down. 72 hours. That's all the court gave them to vacate, because I had filed everything months earlier under quiet guidance. I had planned for this moment before I ever heard her say those words. She didn't break me with her admission. She just confirmed what I already knew, but never allowed myself to admit. I visited the house once before the lock change. It wasn't dramatic. I arrived at night, parked a few blocks away, and walked the familiar path with nothing in my hands. I didn't knock. I didn't want to see them. I just stood on the sidewalk for a few minutes, watching the windows glow under cheap LED lights they probably bought after the utilities were disconnected and reconnected under temporary accounts. I noticed a crack in the living room window. The lawn hadn't been trimmed. Trash bags leaned against the garage like forgotten decisions. The house had rotted in my absence, and that was all I needed to see. The next morning, they were gone. I didn't ask where they went. I didn't check. I didn't care. The locksmith changed every lock. The alarm system was reset. I stepped inside with the realtor and one contractor. We walked through each room. Furniture stripped, kitchen cabinets empty, bedroom doors left open like they had been in a rush or too numb to close them. I asked the realtor to list the property by the end of the week. I didn't want to keep the house, not because of bad memories, but because it no longer served any purpose. It was never my home. It was just a location I financed while others called it theirs. The sale went fast. Clean paperwork, high demand, great location. The offer came in at a higher price than expected. I accepted it immediately. No counter. No delay. In less than 3 weeks, the chapter was closed. The house was no longer mine. It was just a past address. My condo, by contrast, felt untouched by manipulation. It was smaller but mine in every sense. I moved in with only what I needed. New furniture, new clothes, new electronics. Nothing that came from them. No objects carrying history. Everything was quiet. No calls, no knocks, no requests for help. My number had changed. My email was encrypted. My digital trail no longer led back to them. One night, I received a letter, handwritten, no return address, just my first name, spelled carefully. I opened it, read it once, and placed it in the trash without reacting. It was from my mother. She said they were staying with distant relatives, ashamed, confused, still processing what happened. She didn't apologize. She didn't explain. She just said they were trying to figure out what to do next and hoped I'd reconsider eventually. She ended it with, "Family is family. You can't undo blood." But she was wrong. Blood is biology. Family is choice. And I had made mine. The university term began. I logged into classes, focused on coursework, joined discussion boards, and stayed quiet about my personal life. Nobody needed to know the details. I didn't talk about my parents. I didn't mention the past. I showed up, completed assignments, and built something that belonged only to me. It was simple. It was clean. It was real. The business grew quietly. With the new LLC, I brought in 2 freelance partners and expanded into consulting. My name stayed behind the brand, and I let the product speak. Clients didn't care about my personal history. They cared about results. I gave them that. I kept my hours lean, my schedule flexible, and my boundaries sharp. Months passed. No more letters arrived. No more calls found me. Once I did a search out of curiosity. My brother had picked up a part-time job somewhere in town. Nothing serious. Still borrowing. Still smiling through it. My father filed for early pension. My mother had joined a support group, the kind that meets in borrowed church basements and talks about coping with loss. I guess they counted me among that loss. But I didn't mourn them. I didn't celebrate either. They weren't gone. They were just irrelevant now. That was the difference. There was no dramatic revenge, no explosive confrontation, no viral moment of exposure. I didn't need that. What I did was remove their access to the part of me they had fed on for years. I starved the source, and without it, they had to survive on their own. I finished my first term with straight A's. I received 2 offers from investors who'd seen my freelance work and wanted to fund larger projects. I declined both. I wasn't building for scale. I was building for freedom. I slept without earplugs. I no longer flinched when the phone rang. I started eating dinner at a normal hour. I learned that silence could be peaceful, not threatening. I walked through a bookstore and bought 3 novels without calculating who might ask for money if I spent too much. I set up a savings account with no co-signers, no dependents, no fallback plan for anyone but me. That was the end of it. No drama, no final fight, no tragic collapse of their world. Just the slow, clean withdrawal of someone they never truly saw as a person. And for me, that was enough. Because when someone tells you they kept you for the money, believe them. Then take the money, the silence, the distance, and leave. Let them figure out how to live without what they once controlled. Let them rebuild on their own. Let them feel the quiet that follows when everything they took for granted walks away and never looks back. Because freedom doesn't always come with fireworks. Sometimes it arrives with a bag, a login screen, and a closed door.